Okay, we are live. Let's check our audio. Check one, two. We are live from the Word Salad. Thanks for the words.com studios.
Okay.
We are live. There we go. Word Salad.
Okay.
Make sure
It
you.
was slightly delayed, so that was the only thing.
Yeah, make sure.
Okay.
Let's make
Hold on.
sure
Let me
you
make
hear.
sure I can hear myself.
Yeah. There we go. All
Okay.
right.
It was slightly delayed.
All right. I'm gonna go ahead and turn the song here.
That was so weird.
All
Okay,
right, let's go.
that's a good lead into the show because now we have a nice positive vibe going here.
Let's
So, all right,
let's go. All right. Well, we are live. So welcome everyone to Word Salad. We're on the Thanks for the Words.com YouTube channel. My name is Joshua Brown. With me is Mr. Thanks for the Words himself, Christopher Wooten. Chris, how are you?
I'm doing well. Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. You know, it feels like a
Yeah.
Saturday, like major Saturday vibes. So
Yeah,
feeling
we
pretty.
both got like kind of the city look going behind us and everything.
Yeah, the city nightlife. You know, wishing you could be out there in the
Yeah.
city. You know,
Yeah.
it's third Saturday or fourth Saturday, whatever it is, in this long month, going through the getting through autumn here. But yeah, so welcome everyone. Uh, Word salad. We have kind of a topic that I sprang on you yesterday, Chris. I just kind of gave you a name, David Foster Wallace, and a quote, and kind of got sent you hunting. So just kind of a little bit
Uh,
of a quick background, I guess, before we dive too much into it. So David Foster Wallace was an author, probably most famous for his book Infinite Jest, but wrote a whole lot of nonfiction things as well. So that's kind of really what I'm most interested in, and really just going to be talking about a lot of some of the things he talked about, and just using that as a springboard, a jumping off point to have a conversation. So before we get into the actual quote, in kind of the last 24 hours, some of the stuff maybe that we haven't necessarily talked about that you found out about, and um, what kind of first sprang to your mind?
wow, that's a good first question. That's one of those like gotcha questions. Proof that you've actually been looking into this guy, right?
Well, not. I mean, just cursory over. Even if it's just skin deep. What are the first
Yeah.
couple of paragraphs of what's coming in your mind?
Well, the first thing was you showed me the first thing you showed me was the clip itself of the quote, which is like 3 minutes long, and I watched it. It was definitely fascinated. It's very interesting, but I kind of felt like I needed a little bit of context, so
Right.
I was able to, you were able to send me the whole interview, and the thing that we were talking about before is it was very raw, and it was uncut, and and I think that it goes, I even mentioned too that it almost reminded me of myself in a way, because the thing is about what we're doing here is I like the raw engagement of it. That's why I even like going live, because it's not edited, and it's
Right.
there's a dialogue, there's an engagement, and you could see that in the interview. And he very constantly, not only would he kind of doubt himself, or oh, that probably doesn't make any sense to you, but then he would also ask the interviewer, well, what do you think about it? And I found it very human, I guess is a way to put it.
Hmm.
And but also kind of profound. And it's one of those things where I think you have to probably go through it, or maybe read some of his works. I didn't know about him. I didn't actually know who he was until you gave me that quote. And then, kind of learned a little bit about his story and his backstory. And obviously there's some tragedy in there as well.
Right.
But that was kind of the first, like you said, cursory, I guess, read on sort of what he was about, is that he's kind of, maybe in a midlife crisis in a sense. And he's kind of trying to define what what happiness is, what reality is, and how much of that is self-imposed, how much of that is just, comes from society or from government or from media.
Mm.
Uh, and again, this is just over the last day. Like
Right.
I'm planning to look into him. I'm probably going to start reading some of his books because really kind of fascinating stuff. But yeah, that was kind of my initial read on him.
Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to throw up our first quote, and I'm going to also put the full video, the interview, and the clip that we'll be talking about in the notes of the show here, just to make sure again that everyone else has that same context that you're talking about. But so I'll go ahead and read the quote here, so for at least for the first half, and I feel like this kind of sets the foundation of what we can talk about going forward. So. Our quote here: For young people in America, there are very mixed messages from the culture. There's a streak of moralism in American life that extols the virtues of being grown up and having a family and being a responsible citizen. But there's also this sense of do what you want, gratify your appetites, because when I'm a corporation, appealing to the parts of you that are selfish and self centered and want to have fun all the time is the best way to sell you things. And so, to bring it to the context of some of the things that we've talked about with, thanks for the words, the millennial generation. I feel like this is particularly um, uh, poignant to people that grew up in the, you know, late '60s to the '90s of a whole, uh, not necessarily change in advertising, but certainly a more um, frequent amount of it, and then of course being on TV and a frequent amount of that, and then I'm sure we'll get even to like things like Facebook. But in your own personal life, how have you seen kind of advertising the machine of want, um, affect your own life as you've kind of gone from someone like a kid who's not responsible for your finances to someone with a job, a family, that responsibility that he's kind of talking about there.
Yeah, that's good. That's another good question. I guess I would kind of start by backtracking a few years. Actually, really in kind of the mid '90s to the early 2000s for me was kind of a time of cultural awakening. And I think maybe for you as well, just because of we came up in the same era.
Mm,
I was actually really big into George Carlin, and I think that
mm,
George Carlin. First off, my parents showed me a lot of stuff. My dad especially.
uh-huh.
My dad showed me a lot of things that I probably shouldn't have seen when at my age. I watched a lot of. I think my parents got me the movie Total Recall when I was like 7 years old. So I saw a lot of stuff that I probably shouldn't have seen at such a young age. But I do
Mm,
remember I watched a lot of George Carlin, and one of the big themes with him is advertising, is kind of this sort of idea of manufactured necessity, the things that they try to sell you, the
mm,
fear that they try to instill in you. And I think as you're growing up in this era, there's this kind of, dare I say, irony, because this is one of the things that David actually mentions throughout the interview, sort of the merits, but also kind of the downfalls of irony in our culture today. Um, there's kind of an irony in the way that the message of like be yourself, right? Or like do what makes you feel good. The
mm.
things that he talks about kind of later on. I might be spoiling a little bit actually, but
You're fine.
um, there is that idea. Like we even see it in high school. I used to always feel like there was this. Um, it's a very maybe mixed messages is a way to put it. Like do it this way and this way and this way, Cornell notes, and then everything was like structured, but then at the same time be creative and be free and do, and do what you think, do what you really want to do. But then there's this idea of structure, and it's almost like they create this dichotomy. And again, now I might be in danger of putting words in David's mouth, but I kind of got the idea that it's like they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but no, I don't know if I don't know if I answered your question. I kind of rambled a
Yeah,
little bit there,
no,
um,
it's good. But
but
yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned George Carlin because he also
yeah,
kind of came up as I was, rewatching a lot of some of this stuff that I think will definitely get to at some point with the irony and cynicism. Um, but to go back to the mixed messages, I think one of the things that he also talks about is those messages of something like Burger King or whoever it was with a slogan like "Break the rules." And
mm-hmm.
they don't really want you to break the rules. They want you to obey the
Right,
rules and to go and pay for your
right.
hamburger and or have it your way.
I was just gonna say,
you know
have it
that
your way. Yeah,
that was the thing.
yep.
Because you have to have it your way. Everything has to go your way. That's kind of the subtext of it.
Mm-hmm.
But again, even the irony in that of uh, even today, I think most people who need some type of custom order know that that's even kind of a recent thing in fast food. So there's I know getting into the weeds of fast food changes is kind of odd, but
Yeah,
there's still this irony of you're not really getting it your way. It's what they have, what they're capable of doing in that moment. Um,
yeah,
and but they all kind of just had that attitude, and I think
yeah,
I don't want to have a recency bias of, oh, in the 80s and 90s watching TV, and this was really the first time this happened, because I don't know what it was like in the 60s and 70s in that real time. um,
yeah.
but again, it felt like that there was, um, as uh, David talks about a lot, a saturation of TV, and you had an art form, the medium of which what people watched all the time, hours on end at a day, and was saturated with advertisement, just wall to
Mm-hmm.
wall, to the point where advertisement making fun of advertisement, or TV making fun of TV, being self-deprecating in that way, kind of the meta of it. Just became this overwhelming sense of irony. So I guess we can kind of get into some of the irony and the sarcasm. So to play into that, another question that I think I have for you is, you mentioned George Carlin and having that early on. I had that like a little bit later, that probably in my 20s. So even that difference I think plays a lot. But how do you think that sort of raw cynicism did it play a role in how you view politics in the world, and kind of to what extent did that kind of seed plant?
Yeah, I think. Well, I think it's one of those things where, um, what is it? That causation. How does it go? Correlation
Correlation,
doesn't
right?
equal causation. I think that the viewing of Carlin did play some role in that, but I also think having parents, particularly my father, being the one who really kind of was like that, who would encourage their son to watch stuff like that, not necessarily on a direct level. It wasn't. I'm not. It wasn't as if my father would say, "Here, watch this." Like put me in
Right.
front of the TV. But he's watching it, and then I'm sitting there watching it with him.
Mm.
But I think the thing about, and again, I could do a whole nother topic on my parents. My relationship is complicated, but
That'll
they
cost you.
both have
So
very, yeah. But my dad, I'm really honing in on my father here. He was the kind of dad who, I would ask him what something means, and he would tell me to go look it up in the dictionary.
mm,
And this kind of plays into even just the theme of, even if we go back to like the 10th man concept and everything, and really really searching for the answers yourself. That is a big part, I think, of George Carlin, but even to a larger extent, that's kind of questioning, questioning the consensus. Again, to go to my own stereotype cliche that I say. Um, So yeah, I think that you do go through this kind of you go through an awakening. You called it an awakening, right? Like the early but 95 kind of pre-internet era, pre-tech, everything in the palm of your hand.
Mm,
You do go through almost two awakenings. The first awakening is the idea that um, you kind of have to search for the answers to an extent, and you have to find what makes you happy. You have to find what your passion is. And then the second awakening is that the system is going to tell you that that's all bullshit. They're going to tell you when you're younger, they're going to say, like, yeah, you could be president when you grow up, right? You can be whatever you want. And then you grow up and it's like, no, you have to write, you have to write, it's got to be 300 words max, and you got to keep them in, and everything is structured. And then you have to pay, and you have to take this standardized test in order to take this class. And if you don't take this class, then you can't go to this class. But all at the same time, they're feeding you that same message. And then you kind of get into the real world, and you realize how little of the technical stuff. And again, I'm starting to get more, personal. I haven't necessarily done research on the whole subject, but in my experience, I find even if I bring it back to parenting, and I'm getting, I read all kinds of books. I read all kinds of books on, when my wife was pregnant, and then when we, on having babies and little kids. And
mm.
I don't think back to much of that stuff now. I basically just kind of live moment to moment. You do what you think is best. Um, so yeah, again, I don't know if that's answering your question either, but I guess that's kind of, yeah. What do you
Well,
think about it?
well, I think the reason that I thought it was interesting to bring up George Carlin is because in some ways he's the um, antithesis of what he's exactly what um, David is talking about in terms of. I mean, even in that interview later on, there's a quote by David, and he says, halfway intelligent Americans have to deal with this problem of knowing what is right, and knowing that there's work to do and be put in, and the other half of it is, well, this is nothing really matters. It's all bullshit anyway. And I mean that's George. I don't want to say that's his whole act, because that's not fair to say. But a lot of it is. I mean, some of it is
That
like
was actually the name of one of his acts, though. It
I
was
mean,
actually "It's All Bullshit." That was actually the name of one.
well, okay, so you know, I guess that's the point. And it's like, oh,
Yeah, yeah,
your vote is already paid for and bought. Don't even bother.
right,
Um,
right.
and just complete and utter cynicism, beyond sarcasm, beyond irony, just hitting you over the head with this. um, and that's what it had evolved to, and that's what I mean, that's
Mm,
why the act took the years, and it's like in the 80s and 90s it's so sharp. um, and it can do so well, and it's so cutting edge, along with the other people that are going through that. um, but so now you have these generations of the late boomers, the Gen X, and then kind of the early millennials like us, who have just been again beaten over the head with this for you know their entire life, and it's only gotten more cynical, and um, that's kind of used as a baseline for a lot of people. I feel like oh, George Carlin, and it's not just the comedy; it's his outlook on life. But in the same breath, a lot of people who maybe like that or listen to him would also listen to someone say like Noam Chomsky. And I'm not saying that those are two overlapping huge circles, but you know,
right.
there's some overlap there. Um,
Yeah,
and and then you have someone like Noam who can be not necessarily as cynical uh, a in a degrading of it sense, but cynical in a that he can run it down and say, oh no, that's actually the case of, this did happen, um, but still be hopeful about all these situations. I mean, I don't think he would ever say something like
right.
"don't vote" or "it's all bullshit," you know, because you live
You're
in
talking about Gnome now, right?
right, talking about no.
Right, right,
So and
right,
so
right.
what
Yeah,
the
yeah,
and the reason I bring that up is just because you have people that would say those two people and gnome is just kind of an idea. Other people that are kind of like that, where they have that hope,
mm-hmm.
where people look up to them and George and kind of hold those two as one. When they
Right,
conflict, they
right.
conflict on a huge message there. So it's kind of becomes a
Yeah,
whole seriously not literally thing. So you know was
right.
however great that comedy um,
Yeah,
was that or comedy like that, The Simpsons, Saturday Night Live, where you're pushing it over a cliff of sarcasm to the point where, oh, it's all bullshit, look at, like something like that. Is that ultimately, how healthy is that for a society?
hmm. It's an interesting question. Honestly, I don't think I've ever thought to that extent. I do know, again, with George Carlin particularly, there's an interview with him later in his life where this topic kind of came up. Just the kind of the almost despair
Mm.
in our world that George Carlin is highlighting in the things he talks about. And I think the general idea of the questioner was kind of, how do you cope with that? How and how do you live with this if you're kind of filling your audience with this message, right, of what the reality is. And his answer was that he basically jumped ship a long time ago, and he's just an observer. He's just watching it. He's just
Yeah.
here for the his whole thing is America is what did he say? He said, if you want to see the greatest, I'm paraphrasing, but it's something to the extent of like America is, or yeah, when you're born in this country, you're born into a circus, and if you're born in America, you're given a front row seat, and it's something to that effect. And
Mm.
basically, his whole thing is he's kind of just watching the show. Um,
But I mean, think about how we've been talking
yeah,
about narcissism and hatred. To
yeah,
get to that point, and he says a long time ago, um, and maybe this part of it is great that someone like that is so honest. Um, but when it comes down to it, if that wasn't an act, if that wasn't the thing that helped to
yeah,
sell the tickets, how? I mean, if everyone thinks like that, or if even you build enough people to think like that, that's
right.
really destructive. Um,
It,
no one
it,
no one
yeah, it,
cares. It's all bullshit.
It's an interesting, no, yeah, it's an interesting point. I think that I don't think you're wrong. I think maybe it depends on who's interpreting it. For me, and I actually I would dare I say, go back to my experience with basic training. The principle there is basically they strip you down, they break you down, they strip you down to your core, break you down emotionally, physically, and then they build you back up to a
Mm.
stronger soldier, right? And I'm not necessarily saying that that's the best way. There's actually been studies, and you'll find if you look in the history of basic training back from like the 60s till now, they used to be able to hit you. It's evolved quite a bit to where now they're not even supposed to swear at you.
Mm.
So I think it's gotten. I think there's something to be said for that as well. That you don't necessarily have to completely degrade somebody to build them up. But where I'm going with that is I think one could argue that in the sort of George Carlin esque view of things, what you're doing is you're highlighting just how bad it is, so that we can start working on the problems, because the media or the government, or fill in the blank. And again,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not necessarily saying that I believe this completely myself, but I'm saying what trying to sort of play devil's advocate in George's defense. What I maybe he hoped to accomplish is to kind of highlight where these inadequacies are and bring attention to them. But to your point, also, I think that you're not wrong to say that there is that risk that people respond with that equal cynicism and like, yeah, you know what, it is all bullshit, you know,
Hmm.
and then like you said, what happens then? Then the people, you know, the dogs run free.
Well,
Um,
and I think I
so,
would just add, the Trumps of the world, and a lot of politicians on both sides in smaller places, states and local elections would prefer not to vote. They probably love that
yeah,
message. Um,
we're
you
seeing
know,
that right now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we see from the Facebook advertising that was a strategy. How can we
Hmm.
make sure people don't vote? How can we really deter them from voting? They had specific categories of
And
people.
and what
So
and what was the number one message? What was the main thing that was said about why you shouldn't vote? Because it's all bullshit, right? That was the whole thing, was that it's all rigged. Like Donald Trump was calling out, like the whole thing, the post office, it's going to be rigged. There's going to be dead people are going to be casting ballots, and people are going to be sending out multiple ballots, and they're going to go to your neighbors and all this. It's just
yeah,
kind of the same as the theme, right? As though it's all
right.
bullshit.
Well, and that was the thing, to target the Bernie voters, say it's all bullshit.
Hmm.
You guys got rigged by Hillary. Don't
Right,
vote or vote for Donald. Because again, it's all bull. So
right.
and I've obviously I can listen to his comedy and really appreciate it, get it, um, and still think that it's sometimes, but at the same time, I've seen enough of those interviews that you've talked about where, unless he's just really good at playing that character over the entire term, I mean, he's very blunt and clear. That he's just kind of a shit starter. I mean, this and he's has been one his whole life, and isn't gonna
Right.
not be one. So, you know, I just think that he's like a point on the spectrum. So you could go
Yeah.
to someone like earlier, like Lenny Bruce, where again, everything that we're talking about is in the context of uh, so much of uh, talking against and protest against the establishment was um, subversion, um,
Hmm.
and through sarcasm and irony, and that's kind of in the birth of a lot of stuff in the late 40s and 50s, probably earlier than that. But just to kind of use those, like a Lenny Bruce as an example, where there's a difference. I don't want to say that it's completely useless because it is now. It was useless then. That's obviously not the case. Um, so him kind of being another point on that spectrum of
Hmm.
with Carlin, just to take comedy as an example, um, but how it changed from kind of being this weapon to where the the other side is using that weapon against you. And again, not to make it as
Mm.
another sideism thing, politics, the they versus the people, but people in
Yeah.
advertising, people that make decisions in corporations. Um, eh, so I would kind of go back. Was there a moment maybe when with your children, maybe like with a thing on um, YouTube or something that you kind of noticed that maybe had kind of slipped past you before, maybe even through like um,
Mm.
with nieces or nephews with like the media that they've consumed, maybe that are like kind of preteens of things that have kind of jumped the shark a little bit or have been honed even since we were kids.
Are you talking about like things that were appropriate in our day but are not appropriate today? Is
Well,
that kind of where
so
you're going, or?
like I'm not like my kids are a little young for someone like say Anthony Jeselnik, and I don't know his act, and I don't mean to spring that on you either, but just
I
someone
actually
with
don't know who that is, to be honest.
so I don't want to attribute, maybe I shouldn't use it, but someone who is just telling absolute crazy, just way out there jokes about just stupid stuff, or just other things in media, like say like the George Carlin. What would be the George Carlin that you would be listening to with, eventually with the the younger you type situation, or maybe
Yeah.
it's in music, because the other thing too, that's going on during this 90s time is punk rock, right? So
Right.
that's another thing that's kind of been brewing, obviously, in the 80s and somewhat in the 70s too, but
Mm.
it's kind of hitting the, or I should say more like grunge, but also punk is like turning into this, now it's this commercial thing, right? It's not just this underground thing, and so
Right.
that's kind of a
Right.
reoccurring theme too, of the thing that's culturally popular in one spot becomes popular across the nation. And so, what does that mean? Especially in things like music and movies and media, where it used to be more constrained regionally. Things
Right.
become. Um,
What is? Yeah.
so again, to kind of encapsulate back to an actual question, um, what do you see, I guess, as, just because I'm not as plugged in right now with what the kids are doing, maybe, but what do you kind of see as that kind of next step, or are there things that um, in advertising that you see now as an adult that are advertisements through Facebook or through YouTube, um, that
Yeah.
you're because I almost want to think like, man, I should really, my kids watch YouTube so much, I should really tell them to look out for this, because it's, at least for advertising, just kind of basic stuff. But um, yeah, what have you kind of seen, and how do you kind of, in your media diet, maybe phrase it to kind of
Yeah.
to you personally, in your media diet, what are the pressures of, what, how does how does Google have you pegged? What are they selling you? What's the the over the that kind of pressure, as it would have been in the 90s, say, like a, it's all these toy companies and the cereal companies and
Right. Well, the thing I was going to say, and not to take the easy way out, but because it's kind of hard to get too specific with the details there. But I mean, I would just say the medium, and I'm using the singular medium here, um, has evolved so much.
hmm,
Um, that, and now I'm going to say the media. I studied media communications in college, so I get particular about media and medium. So like, for example, the cell phone, we talked about that earlier. My kids they both have tablets. They both have their own tablets, which, I mean, those literally did not exist when we were kids. But we decided
sure,
to get them. We have them very meticulously set up. They have a timer. They can only use it for a certain amount of time per day.
hmm,
And it's very restricted in terms of what certain things, educational apps and things like that. So it's kind of structured in that way. Um, and also, to your point about YouTube, you do definitely have to be careful. You have to monitor. You can put on. They have all kinds of. There's people with these channels where there's these guys just playing with toys and like narrating it. And my
right.
kids love that, but you have to be careful because
Because who
there have
are
been,
they? I mean, just because who are
yeah,
they? I mean, you gotta be,
right. Yeah, and also and there have been some kind of disturbing stories about people saying like just bad things, like self-doubt types, like discouraging things, mean things to the kids and stuff like that. And so you
that's
kind of have to watch.
gross.
It's a different kind of thing though, right? Because like when we were kids, it was. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's probably gotten worse because when we were kids, it was like don't leave Showtime on because a sex scene will come on, or real sex will come on, or something like that. But or something really violent will come on, or Alien or something, or Predator.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
now it's
much better.
like that's still there. But then you also have like the YouTube creep. You also have I've heard these stories about people like hackers hacking into your baby monitors and like saying messages to your kids, or like watching your kids through them. And I don't know if that's the kind of thing that you were
Hmm.
getting at before, with in terms of like what things you watch out for. But I think that just the massive exponential growth, and in terms of media, just
Hmm.
all of them out there, and us. I think that we're in a unique, as pushing 40-ish millennials. Um, we kind of joked before, like being senior millennials.
Right.
We came up in an age where we really saw the end of an era and the beginning of a new era. When we were kids, it was like, I mean, I remember actual Walkmans. Remember that we had Walkmans and then we had Discmans. And then it became like iPods and all that stuff. But I mean, I still remember like recording songs off the radio onto my cassette tape. We went from that to kids having cell phones at school, and then go on the next 15 years. So in terms of the evolution, uh, we've seen it during our time, and I
Hmm.
think that I guess for me, I feel like I've been witness to how much that's changed, to where even just the other day, you and I were having the conversation about how, like, I wish I could break free from my cell phone, but it's like we're joined at the hip. So I guess it's just kind of like having maintaining that control over um, what your kids are exposed to is kind of a challenge in and of itself.
Right. Well, and I would also say, like, but what about, as they're, and maybe, again, the podcast diet of yourself, how do you kind of, you know the George Carlins of today, whether it's a YouTube
Right, right.
channel, um, and you don't have to go into who they are specifically, but how do you have that filter of maybe enjoying something, um, because I'll just use like another example. David talks somewhat about The Simpsons a little bit, and that's kind of another kind of bullet point on the spectrum of this sarcasm and this irony and
Yeah,
the destruction of society through very irreverent comedy, which David notes is being written more and more by these Harvard level people. SNL and
mm,
all these places are very kind of known for the level of writers. So you have these really really smart and well educated people writing this. At first is what is kind of what I remember as seeing kind of guttural humor. Fart. It was kind of
mm,
fart jokes, and that was the reason why I wasn't allowed to watch it, at least initially. Was Bart's a little disrespectful to his parents, and it says
right.
talks back, and all this stuff. So there's something going on there, uh, between who's
Sure.
the type of people who's writing it. But so enjoying, but obviously that how popular that is. So again, I guess the question is, how have you kind of learned and developed over time, or do you like enjoy those types of things, um, while still kind of maintaining, especially over the last year with a lot of you know podcast and these videos being of a political nature, and being that that active type of person who's taking more steps than just talking about it, and
Yeah.
getting other people to do it too.
Right.
How do you balance those two things out in a media diet?
Huh. That's a really interesting term, media diet. I remember you mentioned that for the first time you answered the question, and I kind of sidestepped that part of it. I tried to take the easy way out, and you're not letting me. Yeah, I mean, it's, one thing I will say, I want to give kudos to my wife, because she's always been more on top of the watch what you say and what you do and what you have on TV in front of the kids.
Mm,
Because she was always much more aware of the fact that they hear everything, even when you don't think they do. And I've learned that, and as they've gotten older, they will say things, and I'm like, "Where did you hear that?" And they're like, "I heard it from you." I'm like, "Wow, okay." So, to a certain extent, it's myself, and I think that the point there is that we do have to practice self awareness, which is why I mean, not the only reason why. Obviously, I couldn't do this with my kids running around anyway, but I do make a point to really be apolitical, and I don't show them obviously what I do here. And I think, it's interesting. And I did want to say, and I don't know if I'm kind of jumping off topic here, but
No, go ahead.
politically, it's an interesting topic because, and again, I kind of go back to my dad here. My dad never tried to steer me to support or not support any particular president. You can actually, there are recordings that my dad has of us on tape when I was very young, when Reagan was still president, or no, it was when Bush was president, but it was just after Reagan had been president. And he's asking me like the names of the presidents. And I'm like, oh, President Bush and, President Ray. And he's like, and do you like our presidents? And I'm like, yeah. And I remember thinking back to my childhood, it was very much like presidents are good. They're good people. We look up to them. And it was never partisan. It was only when I got older, then I kind of learned like, okay, my parents kind of didn't really like Bush or Reagan, but, but that wasn't pushed. It was more about respect with this last year. So I talked to my son about Trump because my son said, this was at the beginning of kind of the primary season. And he said, I like Donald Trump. I hope he's president again. And I was like, and I said, I didn't like tell him, don't do that. But I was like, why? Why do you like Trump? And he's like, because he likes pizza. And I was like, I don't know where you got that. Maybe he saw something with, I don't know. It was I don't know. Kids make the connections. And so I told him, I was like, okay, him liking pizza is not really, a reason why I would say that he's good. And then, what I did, I broke a rule, a personal rule, because, and again, I'm getting to a point here eventually, because you were talking about like your media diet and, what you see. So like, I try to be careful about watching news and politics. And what had happened was over time, I realized that my son was becoming aware of some of the things that our president says, some of the way he behaves, character stuff. We're not talking policy. We're talking character.
Right.
And that's the thing I did say to my son. I said, you know what? Personally, Donald Trump is not somebody that I would want you to grow up to be like. He doesn't represent the kinds of things that I would hope to emulate for you and your sister to grow up to be. And I said that like he's mean to people. He makes fun of people. And I just said, he's kind of a mean person. It wasn't political at all. I just said, these are the things about him that I did that because that was not a political move. Obviously he's not voting in the election.
Right.
That was a parent move. That was reinforcing what I think is important. When we were kids, my dad didn't need to tell me like George Bush is a bad man because he still carried himself like a regular, decent person. And so I guess if I'm trying to find my way back to a point to your question here, it is just that kind of self-awareness on an internal and external level, realizing that, I'm a human. I say things, I slip sometimes and say, I've said bad words and my son corrects me. He says, you shouldn't say that. I remember one time I think it was the debate was on and I said something about like, shut up, because Trump kept interrupting. And my son was like, don't say that. And I was like, you know what? You're right. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You're right. I should not say that. So, they keep you in check.
Yeah, that's what they're
For sure. But yeah, but definitely it's just a matter of that self-awareness. And, but at the same time, and it also goes along with that whole, like the whole George Carlin thing where it's exposing you to reality. Now my son's 6. So I always say when I talk to my kids about stuff, you talk to the level of their age. Both my kids know more about death than I probably ever would have thought I would talk to them because we lost our first child. And they know, we have her picture and they know of her. So that has led to more questions and answers. So I like to think, I like to think that I've evolved into a enough of a self-aware, actualized, self-actualized, well-adjusted father that I can guide my kids in a way that is appropriate to their age. And I think that I'm doing all right because, like I said, my son will call me out, and that's one of the things that's important to me is I let my kids know that I'm not perfect, and if I do make mistakes, I own up to it and I will apologize. And I think, dare I say it, I don't think that our president had that.
Hmm.
I can't imagine with his behavior that he had a lot of that modeling for him as a child. Um, does that kind of answer your question? I know
Yeah.
I went off in different directions there, but
Yeah.
you asked tough questions, and we didn't go over this beforehand.
I
So
this was not on the test. No. Um. No. Well, I think one thing I wanted to kind of do is bring it back to that original quote. Before we go on
yes,
to
yes,
that second part, was
yeah,
um, one of the things he talks about is American values and talking about building a family, and one of the other things that is happening during the 80s and 90s that I can kind of speak to a little bit is this idea of family values. um, this is again kind of where the it's not the start of Christianity and conservatism coming together, obviously, but it's getting to a critical mass, during the 80s and
mm-hmm.
90s with, and again, television plays a role in this, and the televangelist, um, radio as a medium,
Moral majority.
moral majority, right?
Yeah,
It's just kind of everywhere, and having been
mm-hmm.
raised in a Christian conservative family with, you know, very young age, going. Listening to Rush Limbaugh on the trips, and you know going to church, and really believing it and things like that. Um,
Yeah,
you identify family obviously as a good thing, but you also identify family with politics a little bit, just because of how much it is. Obviously you understand. Again, in the 90s, it started to the tipping point with, especially with what's going on with Bill Clinton. That's a whole other family values thing that's going on, but with not only at the forefront, but just kind of meshed in with everything that we're talking about.
right.
So this idea of uh, that what uh, David is talking about is of extolling the virtues of the family life, having a responsibility, and you know even taking that out from me now, both the Christian and conservative parts, um, still understanding that there is still something good within a family, but also you know having enough lived experience to know that it's not for everyone, but knowing that there's a going to be a process of rebuilding in the society, of where units of people, at some level, whatever you want to call it, family or not, it's kind of be kind of necessary. um, and
Mm.
so being and having that idea of what he's talking about to go back to, having been so tied to a religious movement and a political movement, I think makes it kind of toxic for a lot of people that are on the left. And so,
Mm-hmm.
if you were to try and say that as a secular, um, nonpartisan person, some of the things that he's talking about, and again, this is kind of in the era of grunge, and that's kind of why he, I think, felt so insecure about a lot of it, is because it sounds like the old man, like he says, like the old man with wagging the finger of, we
Mm-hmm.
need the citizenship in class, and you need to know this, and looking over your ballot is hard work, and you need to sit down and take some hours and read, and all of this stuff, right? So,
Yeah.
so again, with my experience, having that tied to it, um, again, still able to appreciate the family aspect. I'm wondering if, I don't know, you'd mentioned kind of a different political background than me, but I'm wondering just, and you don't have to mention the religious part of it, but having a little bit different perspective, how you kind of view that, whole idea of the family unit, um,
Hmm.
I mean, is it something that's still, how important do you view that as part of your own little community, whether how big that is?
Yeah. Hmm.
I mean, is that actually a virtue?
Uh, I thank you for saying that, because that actually helps really uh, really focus the question a little bit for me. So
Mm,
thank you for saying that. That helps. Because yeah, you know what? I think that it definitely can be virtuous as long as it is genuine and open and non-toxic. um, I don't know. I don't know all who watches this, so I'm being a little careful here. But I am to a large extent estranged from a good amount of my family, um, and a lot of that has to do with really the antithesis of a family unit. Although you know what, it kind of depends on your definition. My my family is very much in and of itself, very self-contained,
mm,
not particularly communal. We didn't go out a lot. We didn't really, even within the family. Most of our family is actually from the East Coast, and most of them lived back there. We only had just a few households, I guess you could say, over here on the West Coast, and even of them, we didn't see them all that much. Um, and yeah, it's just my parents, self-described, by the way, as like homebodies, and very keep to themselves. And as I've grown up and become independent and moved out, we've kind of just found ourselves on different paths that they don't really want to come along with me on.
mm.
Um, so I guess I would say that, on the one hand, I think that it is extremely important because I kind of miss it, you know. Um, but it's one of those things where you don't want to. You have to take care of yourself. Like, you have to look out for yourself. So you don't want to. It's like, what, is it better to have bad love or no love? I guess is one way the simplest way you could put it. I think, but to again, to hopefully answer your question, the idea that by not having something, you realize how good it might be, if it was right. And to a certain extent, I do get a little bit of that with my wife's family. They're actually pretty much the antithesis of that. And I get along, pretty well with them, and to a large extent, they've kind of filled that void. There are a lot of things now as an adult there that I see in their family that I'm like, wow, you guys do that? We didn't do that. And on the other side of it, it's like they don't necessarily have the experience of, you know, just the again. I'm not trying to bash my family here too much here. It's
Yeah,
just
your in-laws. Come on now, Chris.
just this kind of, I guess, like non-participation sort of thing in what's going on outside of yourself, and in certain instances, such as child loss, perhaps, um, the non-participation is noticed.
Mm.
I guess is a way to put it. But you do, yes. I guess to answer your question, I do think that there is merit to the value of a strong family, but I think that there's perhaps particular parameters that need to be met for that to be a a positive.
Right,
I
right.
guess if
So
that makes sense.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that um, you know, sometimes, you know, just in, personal experience where people have not had, the say the relationship with the parents that um, that I've had, they have somehow used that adversity, and not all of them, but and I guess maybe this is self-selecting, but some people have obviously been able to use that adversity to push themselves forward. Um, Whereas maybe the people who didn't, I just didn't haven't interacted with, or they're just not going to
Right.
be they're just not going to be as successful because for whatever reason, it's not some other thing happened to where um, just it wasn't there for them. Um, and I think so just from hearing you say that, it sounds like that there was something, there's something that could have been had that wasn't, whether it's in the form of a personal relationship or um, just a singular moment, or things that have happened over time, um, that we can work with as people. But I also think just as from the point of a society, what is the difference between um, that experience, and if everything had been as perfect as you could have wanted it, you know what I mean? So how is that really helping
Yeah.
out as us, to build the society? How important is a family unit? And it can be just something as simple as a father staying in their child's life for the whole time. How much more virtuous is that than if we came upon a culture of of came upon a culture where the father left, for a very
Right.
significant time? How could we say without some serious investigation that we were more virtuous than these people because dad's there 6 to 8 hours a day, or whatever
I
that time
mean,
is?
I definitely wouldn't. I personally would not ever claim to be more virtuous than anybody,
Well, maybe
especially for
I keep using virtuous, just to create a functioning society, a democracy, maybe to bring in kind of
sure.
the political aspect of it.
Right.
What we would kind of want for an American society is that the most ideal, two parents, and um, being in their life as much of their waking moments as possible.
I think that there is. I think there's something to be said for quality over quantity.
Mm,
Um, yeah, I'm being very careful with what I say because I'm not super well researched on this topic, and I don't try to. I'm not one of those type of people that will try to claim to be.
sure, I
I'm
understand.
only gonna. I'm gonna. I can obviously speak to my own experience, and then I can speculate to a certain extent. I think that I think there's merits to all of the above. I think there's obviously there's a nature versus nurture. Um, I think that you know, for me, if I'm thinking about my parents were there for me when I was growing up. They were there for what I needed. My dad provided for us. Always had a roof over our heads, and he was a good dad. I mean, I don't get me wrong. I think that my dad, when I was growing up, um, I think my parents had their flaws, as we all do, but I also think that they were good parents in their own ways. I think that a big thing or theme maybe for my dad was really the idea of self-sufficiency. I remember him even saying, as I got older, just the idea of like hoping that his kids are able, essentially, I don't know if he used those words specifically, but just the idea of not needing them anymore. And I do remember my dad saying in the earlier years of my adulthood, after I had gotten married and started to kind of establish myself, and he had said that like basically once I got out of high school, like he didn't have to worry about me anymore, and he was always, but he said it in like a positive way. And I guess where I'm going with this is, I mean, that's not a bad thing. Like, it's not a bad thing to be able to kind of make it, or whatever you want to call it,
Mm,
And as a parent, I mean, that is a good thing to hope for, but now I'm kind of getting into the feels aspect of it. But I kind of had the feeling that it was sort of like, well, all done.
Mm,
You made it. Like, I did my job. The
yeah.
dynamic of parent, yeah,
Go ahead.
the dynamic of parenting changes when you grow up. I think you still need your parents, but it's a different thing. When your parents don't make that, if evolution with you, I think that's where problems can be caused.
Like for
Um,
example, can
yeah.
you imagine saying that to one of your kids? Like,
Um,
like, boy, I'm so glad I don't have to worry about you anymore.
I I would definitely, I could see myself saying, to my 30-year-old son, like, you know what? You turned 18, you went to college, you got a job, you got married, you got a house, you did all that on your own, and I'm so proud of you, son. Like, I could say that.
Yeah, that's something
But
completely. That's that's not what your dad
I'm
said.
I'm trying to be nice. I mean, well, yeah, I'm trying to pick out the goods, the good.
No, I know,
I
but
don't think.
that's just what you. I'm not. And again, this isn't. Maybe I put it that virtuous thing. Not so much value judgments. Again, this is an
Yeah,
evolution.
yeah.
This is, um, I'll just say like so. My dad was. Um, I don't even know if that was something that my grandpa would say to my dad, but there's there's a difference there. My dad was born in 1960, um, so but a lot of the people that I knew had older dads too. A lot of my friends in high school, so my dad was 25 when he had me. A lot of people were, again, that was a time thing, in their 40s. So by the time they're in high school, it was my dad's my age now, 35, 40, and
Right,
the other dads are 60 or 50. So that's a whole generation thing. If you think someone that was born 1960 versus someone who was born in 1945, huge difference in their
sure,
upbringing. What I would have to think is a huge difference. Um, so I understand, that just because we're the same generation, obviously doesn't mean that our parents are, and there's a lot of growth just even in between a 10-year period of that time. Um,
right,
but certainly, at least again from a media perspective, that idea of uh, the father who it's not that he's not concerned about the well-being, but is maybe more unemotional about it or doesn't know how to do it. The stereotypical type of dad, and I think
right,
that, and I think that itself is kind of a spectrum where, I don't. Maybe no, some people had the absolute stereotypical dad, but maybe there was like one thing out of that stereotype where your own dad kind of fit it. Oh, he doesn't know how to talk to me about about the birds and bees or something like that. Oh, that's one
right,
thing, but also that um, the things kind of how you are building men in society, things like confidence and how to treat the opposite sex and those things that no one else is going to tell you. Um,
sure,
and so I feel like that has just evolved. Even in my oldest is 14, my youngest is 3. It evolves over the lifespan of my 4 kids and how I'm going
right.
to address it. Not that I'd say I have addressed it yet, I have not, but in that 10 years
Hmm.
there's going to be some changes in what you feel comfortable talking about and what
Right.
all of those things. um, but and those are all the tough things, but then there's also just
Hmm.
like you talked about those conversations that are just like, hey, hanging in there, or hey, you got your life together, and how us as sons or daughters can take those types of comments too, because we they have this whole other lived experience, and just because that they're a parent, we like to think that we know them, when sometimes parts of that can be just as strange as any stranger out there. So how they
Mm,
meant it may, and how we accept it. So um,
yeah.
you know, not really a question out of that, but I think the again, kind of to tie it back to the societal aspect of how important just some of those small conversations can be. Um, like you said, just those moments of not kicking you off the couch when George Carlin is playing. I think those types of moments. I think we all can tie
Right.
to someone in our family, and how it's kind of affected us. Maybe not even politically or something, but just you know more likely, hey, South Park's on, my kid sits through, or whatever that thing is of our time. How we
Right.
feel as a filter for this great media to our children as well. This hose
Hmm.
that is kind of never ending, and like you mentioned, it's attached to
Yeah.
the hip, and you can't really turn it off. So, but with that, let me before we get too into the weeds
Yeah.
here, let me jump into the second quote,
Give
because
that a second.
I think it's
Yeah.
just as important here. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this up here.
Okay.
And we've been kind of talking about this, but so he goes on to say that the point of all of this is that American economic and cultural systems, in terms of selling people products and keeping the economy thriving, do not work as well when it comes to educating children, or helping us help each other know how to live and be happy, if that word means anything. Clearly, it means something different from whatever I want to do. That's not happiness. That feeling of having to obey every impulse and gratify every desire. You had talked a little bit earlier about happiness, and so I think that'd be kind of a good start. Was what how has happiness, your idea of happiness, changed? Maybe even from uh, your mid 20, like in the last maybe 5 to 10 years. Let alone from teenage. What how's that kind of evolved for you?
Like what I think happiness is.
Yeah, or um, just how you kind of framed it as something obtainable in your life.
Well, I mean, obviously, I think having kids throws a throws it for a loop, probably a little bit, right? I mean, your whole
That means
if
you
you're
can't have
there,
happiness.
no, no. I mean, if you're there, if you're an involved parent,
Mm,
by definition, um, I mean, I guess I should say your your personal definition of happiness doesn't necessarily change, but your focus again. I'm saying if you're an involved parent, I should distinguish because it does just a biological as a sperm donor doesn't necessarily mean that you're a parent per se.
uh-huh.
But if you're somebody like you and I who are striving to be there, I think it does shift it to an extent because, happiness for me becomes seeing my kids thrive and seeing them becoming,
Mm,
well adjusted as they grow up. So, but the core of that comes from the same person, right? This the same person that in our 20s and 25 or like you said 30
mm.
pre-kids, it's you're still kind of the same person at your bare essence. So I don't know that the definition of I mean well I guess I should say happiness as a concept is quite abstract. It's kind of hard to pin it down. I mean, happiness a generalized like I have a happy life, or is happiness a specific state of mind? I'm happy right now. Now I'm sad. Now I'm angry. Now I'm surprised, right? Or is it
Yeah.
like is it like you said, there's a spectrum too. So it's kind of hard to pin it down, I think.
I'm glad that you asked that, because yes, the other day I was watching a video of Jack Black. He has like a gaming channel. It's like Jablinski, I think it's called. Um, and it was last year, had to be last year, because he's at Disneyland. He's celebrating his 50th birthday. And so they were doing this 50 challenge, and they're going to ride every ride. So if you've ever been to, have you ever been to California Adventure? I think it's called.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So there's this big like a tube ride, the water ride. You know, it's like a
That's what used to
big
be Great
bear.
America, right?
No,
Or is this the one by Disneyland?
Disneyland California Adventure. It's the park that's across
right.
from Disney.
Yeah, yeah.
So
yeah, I've been there.
There's
Yeah.
that water ride. You know, it's Big Bear. There's bears.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a water ride. So the
Mhm.
videos of him, they're getting down, they're going through this water, and I was watching it, and I've been down that ride like so many times, and I was just, the video is so cool because it's like you're right there, you're riding it, and
Mhm.
there's just I had this moment of knowing the feeling what it was like to be on just at any ride at any amusement park when there's like a fleeting moment of you forget any problems that you were having on the vacation. You forget, whatever was
Right.
back at work. You forget anything that was with the spouse or with any of your family. If you had a headache that morning, you forget literally everything. And there's like this feeling that it's like in your spine or your inside of like that excitement or the joy of, and you're turning the wheel and the water splashing and everybody at the same time in the ride is surprised and in the shock and so
Right.
so the reason I bring that up is because I think that's as close to what I could ever say is like happiness in a singular moment. Um,
Right.
that
Yeah.
feeling, however long you can hold on to that.
Right. Yeah, and that points to the, again, like that moment to moment emotional definition of happiness. And I only say that because I do feel like there is a somewhat of a difference, I think, in terms of like the constitutional definition of like the pursuit of happiness versus that happiness that you have on that big bear ride, right? Like,
Right.
because it's not gonna stick with you after you get off the ride. All your problems are still there.
That's constitutionally protected right there.
Yeah, right. That happiness.
Yeah.
Well, the pursuit
Well,
thereof.
okay, you're right. You're right.
But yeah, I think that, and again, at the risk of getting a little bit more personal, like, having lost my first, just, people say like, have your child is like the happiest moment of your life. I can't say necessarily if that genuinely would be true for me had my situation not been the way it was, but having lost my daughter, and my son, who was my next, my first that we brought home, the labor with him was difficult. There were some issues going on there, and it took him. He needed a little extra help to take his first breath. It was nothing. It was fine, but it was just one of those. Especially with our history, it was stressful. Is what I'm trying to say. It was really
Right.
really stressful.
Right.
When he took his first breath and he cried, like, that was the happiest moment of my life. Like, I can still put myself in that moment, and I can feel it inside of my,
Mm-hmm.
I could feel like this. It was almost like, like your heart sinks, but it was a good heart. It was like a shock, like,
Right.
oh my God, like this is the most amazing thing. The sound of my living child making his first sound, his first breath was that was the happiest I had ever been and ever have since. I don't know if that's the same kind of as your description. It's because the point I'm trying to come around to, and that's not to denigrate the sincerity of the happiness that you feel on the ride either. What I'm saying is there's something that happens inside you. There's a physiological response that makes you feel good or euphoric or whatever it is. I was gonna say, I don't know if this is. I don't know if this is getting to the answer to your question, but I just think it's a funny side note. The week the week of my son being born, I've got, I don't know if you can even see, I got this little spot right here. I actually take medication. I have a lot of skin issues. I actually had to have surgery because I had this one really gnarly something going on, and you can actually see the scar occasionally on some videos. If you get the right angle, people might have seen it before,
Yeah.
um, but anyway, I had surgery for that, and it was kind of gnarly, and they gave me some pain medication for it just because it was like pretty big incision they had to make, and I had this moment, like my son was like 3 or 4 days old, and I was like putting him to sleep, and I was looking at him, and I felt like just this incredible, just like loveness, like on another level. I was like, oh my god, this is just this is what people talk about when they have kids.
Mm.
But then I put him to sleep, and I went downstairs, and I also realized that I'm also taking this Norco, and I'm like, this might just be me being high because like I think there was a little bit. I think there's probably a little bit of
I
both. I
love you,
think it was in.
man.
Yeah, I think it was enhanced. I think that love was real, but I also think it might have been a little bit enhanced. So
Performing,
what I'm trying
yeah.
to get at here is our life experiences, I think, help shape, um, our definition, our perception of what happiness is. I think.
Yeah, and I mean, to that point, I've watched a few of gentleman by the name Professor Robert Sapolsky, who's a professor at Stanford, kind of did some neurological stuff. So, just to that quick point, I think sometimes people's capacity for happiness, as we know, I mean, people with depression, sometimes that's, as he calls it, the inability to
Hmm.
appreciate sunsets. That it's just, you just can't do it. And
Right.
and some for varying reasons that I'm sure are still being researched, just whatever, chemically, or uh, something that happened, before you were born in the womb, could have set this thing off. So, um, but um, to bring that the happiness point back, I think there's also, you mentioned the moment to moment. Um, I'm not sure if you've ever watched, Mad Men, that show, but there's a clip of Don Draper, and he's in the office, and he says, happiness. This is and he's an ad man. He's in advertisement. If you haven't ever seen the show, so that's kind of the background of this, the media again. Um, he says happiness is a moment before you need more happiness. And
Mm.
that's, it's very clear. It's just like you get hungry, but while you just had a meal. um, and I think, sometimes in the working culture, and I've been a victim of this. I had a manager who said, always have like a vacation, even if it's on, you take a day off, even if it's once or twice a year, or even if it's on the Saturday, and you're not taking any time off, but you're still going out. Always have something to look forward to. And I have always tried to do that, because there's always, um, and again, not to go completely off track, but with what that professor talked about with feeling pleasure and feeling happiness in monkeys and things like that, is they don't feel the pleasure and the happiness when they like eat the reward. It's they feel the spike in the pleasure and the happiness is when they are entered into the room where they're going to do the task, because as soon as they come in, they go, I'm going to get the treat. I know this one. I come in, I know how to do the task, I know the button, and then I'm going to get the treat.
Right.
And so it's all this anticipation of, oh man, I'm going to get the treat, I'm going to get the treat. So they still feel the pleasure,
Right.
obviously, when they're eating it, but it's not as good as that, as the anticipation. And so, I don't think that this boss was, secretly playing some mind game to say, oh, he's always going to be in anticipation, so he'll always be happy. I just think that he kind of found
Yeah.
that out through his own life experiences. Oh, if I always have something to
Right.
do every month, then dang, I feel pretty good, and I can, make it through this hell of a life. And it's a little less
Yeah.
pleasurable for me. So,
No. Yeah.
that's something that I've kind of fallen into, and I say fallen into because, sometimes it does feel, because when you set yourself up in a cycle like that, sometimes, once
Hmm.
you have the moment, you're on the flight back, or you're on the trip back, and it's Sunday night, and it's like, oh, I got so much crap and the people to deal with. You've you've
Right.
taken yourself off the drug, so to speak, Uh,
Right.
so
Yeah. It's interesting to your point too. It's kind of it just made me think of this example. Similar kind of thing where I remember because I used to substitute teach, and
mm,
I remember one time I was subbing. It was like a long term gig, it was a couple of weeks, and it was a particularly difficult class. It was high school, and it was like sophomore age, and yeah, it was rough. And I remember it was just like during winter season, I think, and I took a ski break. I went to the mountains, and I remember the week going into it. This is where it gets funny because I'm actually at school experiencing it, the non-happiness, feeling happy for, oh, I can't wait for the ski trip to get away from this. And then I'm at the ski trip in the chairlift going up the hill thinking like, oh shit, I got to go back tomorrow with this class. Um, and that's kind of the whole like living in the moment thing too, right? Um, but yeah, I think that speaks to your point about anticipation. I think maybe we're wired that way. We're always kind of looking ahead.
right, and it's just difficult to navigate that because we can be so
Yeah,
different, experience things differently, but um, again, in terms of thinking of it virtuously or whatnot, what's the most healthy thing? I think we all kind of have to find that too. Is how, how can I
yeah,
manage my mental health? Um, and because again, none of this is to say that try going on vacation or trying to find your happiness is bad, or you shouldn't. um, but again, to go back to kind of what David is saying, is how do we also not shut ourselves out of this public life, and what needs to be done to
yeah,
be a citizen? How do we not turn that dial off completely and just go, be in our virtual world where I can control everything that gets put in front of me, and I can experience happiness. Like tomorrow, if I just wanted to, from like midnight to midnight, like I could just have a virtual world and just be nothing but you know, everything that you know mid 90s me could have ever dreamed for in terms of a technological future. So
right,
what are you
right.
going to do? How do you be uh, that responsible citizen, father, employee, especially working from home? I don't have to be anywhere.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, I think you're kind of hitting on the $64,000 question, as it were, when it comes to happiness and that kind of balancing act. I know, we were talking a little bit about depression earlier, I think
Mhm.
offline, and I know that that's something that David struggled with for, I guess, most of his adult life. Um, for me, you had mentioned the not being able to appreciate the sunsets. I remember getting to a point where um, I wasn't appreciating the joy of my kids anymore. Like I couldn't experience that. I knew that I was missing it. I was there, physically there, and I was like involved, but I wasn't experiencing it. And and the other thing was I used to like working out would always be a way. And this is where I'm kind of getting into there's a physiological side to like what we call happiness.
Mm.
And you could kind of get the endorphins pumping, and like going for a run used to be my way of kind of managing that. And I remember I went for a run when I was feeling particularly bad, and I felt worse when I got done, when I came back home. And that's when I started getting worried. I was like, that's why I was thought things are getting bad, because even my little coping mechanisms weren't working anymore. And I think the sort of textbook, as it were, depression is a complicated thing, but a big part of it is just that not being able to experience the moment and not being able to anticipate the future. It's kind of when you have both those things. Like if you might be in a shitty job, you might be stressed out at work, unhappy, but if you have like your managers was saying, if you have that thing to look forward to, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be vacation. It might just be a really good meal that you're going to have when you get
Yeah,
home, right? Or your
exactly.
favorite show is going to be on that, right? So, but being
Exactly.
able to have that is such a big part of it. And I think that to kind of bring it around, but I think what David might have been trying to say is that we have to allow ourselves to experience humanity. The human condition is everything. It's happiness, it's loss, tragedy, sadness, it's the ups and downs, and kind of be okay with it. I think that's where the danger of that whole, do what you want kind of thing, do what makes you feel good kind of comes in, because that's not really sustainable, I think. You even kind of touched on that earlier with when you were talking about George Carlin, and like, what if everybody just felt that way? What if everybody just felt like, oh, it's all bullshit, it doesn't matter? Like, what would happen? So yeah, I think that that's the challenge, I guess, and more so than ever in this technological age. Here we are right now. I mean, we're using the media that we have at our disposal to have this conversation, and part of that is a necessity because of everybody's socially distancing and everything. But yeah, I mean, there's no one right answer. I mean, we're all just experiencing life, and I think trying to do the best we can. But yeah, living in the moment and being able to anticipate the future and be happy about it or excited about it, but not feeling the pressure to be happy. There's also that, because there's also the people, oh, smile. Why don't you smile more? Like that you can't impose happiness. There is a sense of, and again, bringing it back to like the founding of our nation predicated on the pursuit of happiness. It's almost like you put it on a pedestal, like, well, we also have to experience everything else that goes along with it.
Yeah, or even just something like what was a jolly good time for them? What was happiness? Was that getting new dentures put in? What? But
yeah,
I think you were talking about a little bit to the happiness with regarding with children. I think part of it too is having those conversations now with my older girls. Um, regarding to have that happiness, because we have two of those things that you were talking about kind of missing. One of them being certainty about the future, and the other one living in the moment, which um, there's I don't know if you feel this, but there's kind of a one thing there just never feels like there's a moment. At the top of the show, I said a Saturday vibe, and it was a little bit, but for a while, I never had like a weekend. It didn't feel like a weekend. It felt like just kind of another day. And part of that's because you're staying at home, but the days kind of lose the feel that they used to have, and so all of those uh, constructs that used to be there, however small societal things that were kind of built in and are now being kind of taken for granted, and so you have the uncertainty. Um, Sometimes I don't even know how to address it or to bring it up. To say, hey, hang in there. You'll see your friends someday. As the COVID cases are going up, and because in our area the schools are saying, oh, well, yeah, we'll be back, and not that I don't want them to go back or think that it's bad, but it's just no one is certain. So how? So again, what's the how can you not encourage people and even your kids to find anything and to cling on to any type of happiness that they can right now? If it's playing on the iPad, that's tough. It's not the same as our parents or maybe their parents were about chasteness and regarding having fun and screen time and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely I mean, it's a unique situation on all fronts with the advent of technology, and then the situation right now. It's I'm in a unique situation, at least compared with you, I think, because my kids are a bit younger. My son just started kindergarten this year, and I think for kids that are just starting off on the school side, it's they don't really know anything else. I mean, my son did go to preschool, which was, when he found out that he wasn't going to be going back to preschool last year, he was devastated.
Mm.
And we go every Thursday to drop off his work and pick up his new packet for the week. And we pass by the playground. He said just this last week, he's like, he said, I'll be going back to the playground and it'll be within 100 days. And I was like, how do you know it'll be 100 days? And he's like, because the coronavirus can't last more than 100 days. I didn't have the heart to tell him, like, it's been like almost 300 already. But
It's getting there.
yeah, it's tough. It's like, on the one hand, my son doesn't know anything else necessarily, like,
Mm.
because he hasn't been in school all this
That's
time.
true.
But at the same time, but he is I mean, he's noticing it. He had my family had a get together a couple weeks ago, and they got to see some of their cousins in kind of an outdoor environment, and he hadn't seen them in a long time. And just the other night, he came out crying, saying that he was sad because he missed them. And it's kind of like it reminded him about those other people. And so we were able to arrange the day. We had a kind of a get together where people were wearing masks and everything, but at least having that interaction. But yeah, I mean, you speak to an important point about how, again, just the idea that we all have to kind of grow and, kind of plugging myself in a sense here, but I had an episode earlier in the year where I was talking about kind of using this opportunity, using this experience as an opportunity to model resilience for our kids. Because
Mm.
I see a lot of, I see people, you see the people on Facebook who discourage the masks, who could take their kids out to parks and play with other kids because, we're not going to hold them we're not going to keep them inside. And, on the one hand, okay, you think you're teaching your kids to be strong, but you're also teaching them to, kind of disrespect science or, authority in a sense. I do think that there's merits to teaching your kids to question things. I talk about questioning things, but also it's got to be informed. It's not just, you're basically just teaching your kids to, I don't know, give up, if we want to call it that. But, the idea of being strong, like, okay, yeah, this is hard, but, our
Yeah.
country called on in World War II, the country called on people to do a lot more than wear a mask. I don't know. I think there's just some irony there with the idea of, like, you would do anything for your country, but you won't wear a mask.
Yeah.
You know, after over 200,000 people have died.
Well, and I think
Um,
you make a good point because um, part of what their resilience, maybe they'll probably be more resilient than us, is because
yeah.
the word that keeps getting used is normal, or returning to normalcy, or this isn't normal,
Right.
or we need to get back to normal. um, and I, first of all, I don't think that we will ever have that same normal that we had before.
Right.
Things are going to be different, regardless of who
Yeah.
wins. Um, and so I think the younger generations will be quicker to understand that, and they'll want to change it
Mm-hmm.
anyway. Um, but again, to bring back that quote from David on there of these economic systems that work very well. It was always the case of how do we put kids back in school because the schools have to make money. How do we get people back in the jobs? It was never the the, the first point of business from the government standpoint never seemed to be how are we going to do all of this safely? How can we keep everyone safe? What's the plan
Right.
there? And then we can figure out how to get people back to work safely. And so again, it was about this whole economic system of how do we get the economy back, not how do we keep people safe.
Right.
And again, I don't want to take for granted the need for um, people to get back to work, and obviously that's a key. If things aren't done and weren't done that have been done, um, we could be in
Right.
a lot we could be in a lot worse shape, and can still be. However,
Mm-hmm.
it's just another example of that type of priority where systems in America work very great, very, very well, to capitalize and make money, but not to ensure the health and safety of its citizens.
Right. I mean, yeah, I mean, because that's not what sells, I guess, right? That's not what moves the economy. We need people to consume. We need people to work so that they'll consume, and you know, giving everybody a stimulus or making healthcare free doesn't really work to that end.
Mm-hmm.
So, um,
Well, and
yeah, I mean,
I,
you know, when you have a go ahead. I'm probably wandering off the point anyway.
well, the reason I bring it up is because I wonder if, um, as bad as COVID situation has been, and we're still going through it. Um, could that have been? Could it still be an opportunity to get rid of that normalcy? To look at, see, do research on how that stimulus affected people, and why that
Yeah,
couldn't be. Take this up as an opportunity to look at things like, um, plans for. Uh, I can't remember the exact name of it. Like, say that Andrew Yang's plan of, a check from
yeah.
the government
The
for,
UBI, yeah,
oh yeah, basic income, right? So,
yeah,
looking at those types of things, what's really going on here? If the Fed is just printing money, because of this, that the only end is the economy good? Um, what else is possible? you know,
right, right.
and how can we, you know, and again, I hate to say it like this, to use COVID as an opportunity, because it just feels so bad and dirty to say it like that, but to make the most of an obviously terrible situation, not
Yeah.
only for the health ramifications in the future, but if they're gonna use the economy, then why can't
Hmm.
normal citizens use this also as a time to transition away from uh, a legacy type of economy?
Right. I mean, you know, I just look at right here. Look at all this traffic. Like, think about on if everybody was able to start. Not everybody, obviously, people who work in healthcare and things like that. But I've heard so many stories about people who used to like even like CEOs, people who are in positions where they have to travel a lot, traveling across the country to go to meetings and things like that. I think we've been able to demonstrate, I know I have personally with my job, that not everything can be done, but a lot of what we do can be done remotely. And how
Mm,
much gas, I mean, even just gas money,
right.
on its own, how much we've saved, but the carbon footprint, we get into
Sure.
that conversation. How much of that can we pull back by people teleworking more? Um, yeah, I think that there's the possibilities are really endless in terms of what lessons could be learned from here. The question is, are we going to go there? Are we going to do that as a society? I'm not sure. One way or the other, one can hope. I mean, we progress as a society overall in the long run, but it's always kind of a one step forward, two steps back kind of situation sometimes. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, but we have to stay engaged, right? That's like the point you're making before about not becoming apathetic, but actually doing, getting in the game a little bit, and hopefully trying to inspire that movement.
Yeah, well, and I think I hopefully we're seeing it in the early votes too, of just kind of that civic
Yeah.
duty, and that's kind of been a nice kind of reminder. Well, I know we've been
Hmm.
going for plus 90 minutes here. It's like a marathon.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I
and
actually am working this weekend too, so I should get to bed pretty soon.
yeah, well, I know I've taken a lot of time, and we could go on for hours. This has been such a fun topic, but
Yeah.
I wanted to thanks for indulging me talking about this
Yeah.
topic on short notice.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. It's definitely. Did we get anybody? I can't see the chat from here, but did we get anybody in the live chat with anything or?
No, it was messing up for me too.
Quiet night.
It wouldn't
Oh,
refresh for me. It was still showing as like gonna start at 9:30, even at like 10 o'clock when we were going. It finally did
oh, really?
clear up for me, but I think it didn't start for some people. But yeah, we'll get the
Oh
hang of it.
no.
Yeah, so it
Okay,
but which was weird because
but it
it
recorded.
yeah, it recorded it and it did work because it turned on for you. Um, when you were
Yeah,
listening to it. So I think it was just a player
yeah.
error on some things. But um,
Okay.
so well, if we'll probably connect in a couple of weeks. Next week we got Halloween. So everyone out there have a great Halloween. Stay safe.
Yep.
And anything coming up in the next couple